Can you all see this PowerPoint?
Yep.
Perfect. And one more time, if I pull it up, everyone can still see it. Everything's going well. Excellent. All right, so everyone, thank you so much for coming to our presentation with our BUCS program, our Social Justice Coalition that our fellow sports psychology students and faculty members and beyond have helped start this past summer. And today's presentation is going to be on allyship. And I'm very humbled to have with me for this panel discussion and presentation two fantastic individuals, Kenise Salinas Willich. She is a principal over in Kansas, excuse me. And she is a social justice public speaker. And with her is her partner named Cam Awesome, probably one of the coolest last names I've ever heard in my entire life. He is an Olympic level boxer, and he works with Kenise as a social justice public speaker. And then yours truly, obviously I'm Stephen Cadu. I am getting my master's degree in sport, exercise, and performance psychology from BarryU, and I'm a member of our BUCS presentation. So obviously, any type of presentation, everyone loves to start off with the textbook dictionary definition of what is allyship. And I found this amazing definition online. So I'd just like to read it to you very briefly before we begin our presentation, followed by a short video discussion. And allyship, in a nutshell, is a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, and accountability with marginalized individuals and or groups of people. And that is by the Forbes Global Director of Diversity, Cherie Atchison. So I would like to just jump right in. I'd like to start off with a question for Cam. So Cam, to you, what is allyship? And Kenise, I will ask you that same question following his response.
What I believe allyship is a path for people to follow that helps keep them in the guidelines of growth.
So could you elaborate a little bit more on that? So like, what would these guidelines look like?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Of course. So some technical difficulties. If you could just repeat your response. So what is allyship to you?
Allyship to me is, I believe it's going to be a pathway for people take a journey to become more conscious of their surroundings and kind of gives them a role on the part they should play in their own growth. How to stand up to other people and the way to handle situations and break through barriers.
Fantastic. And Kenise, same question to you. To you, what is allyship?
Well, I have to tell you, Stephen, the word allyship was new to me. You introduced me to allyship. In my work, I use the term liberation, social liberation. And so to me, an allyship and liberation is kind of one and the same. Is what do you do now that you know something? So once you learn about things, once you know more, then you do more. And it's about bridging gaps and getting to know people who may or may not look like you or have grown up with you, because it's not just about race. It can be about social class. It can be about gender. But it's creating friendships and allies with people who may or may not look like you or grew up like you.
So Kenise, like you said, being so new to this terminology, is this something that you've seen widespread across the individuals that you've encountered and that you've worked with? Or is this something of a newer ideology or a newer way of thinking? Or is this just a different classification?
I think it's newer because until you get to know about yourself and until you understand your biases or what you have grown up to believe or that you were socialized to believe, you don't know how to be a good ally. People say that they're good friends, but what does it mean to be a ally? And an ally would stand up for that friend no matter what, race, gender, social class. And I think today it's kind of hard. People are not sure if that's what they want to do. They don't know if they want to stand up for someone who doesn't look like them or believe in them. And so I think it's relatively new, but it's opening. But with our country today, we are starting to see more people band together and become allies.
And so just going to continue off of that comment. So banding together, the idea of building allyships beyond friendships, why is that important? Why do we actually need allies? Why should I have to go out and support another person? Why do we need people like this?
Cam, you want to answer that? Okay. We claim to be a melting pot, right? We claim to be the United States of America. We claim to take in everyone. We want to make everyone feel like they can have the American dream. I don't know if we can ever get to that part of freedom if everyone doesn't become an ally to one another. So if I am friends with Kimberly, if you mind me using you, and she is my friend, and if we're walking down the street and someone says something to Kimberly that is not right, or that she feels bad or makes her feel less than, then I should be able to speak up in her defense, especially if she's in a culture of the dominant culture. So say she's in my culture. I identify as African American, I'm Black. I have Kimberly come to a Black space. And if someone were to say something to Kimberly, I'm going to stand up for Kimberly because she is my friend. She's my ally. But in the reverse, sometimes people like Kimberly, and I can't say Kimberly wouldn't take up for me, but some people in the white culture are afraid to do the opposite. If they heard someone say something to me very demeaning, very derogatory, upsetting, they just don't have the words to comfort me or to stand up for me. And that's where we're feeling some disconnect there in our world, because white people are having a hard time knowing what to say and how to become an ally to someone outside of their race, because they don't want to mess up, or they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't want to look bad, or they're fearful. And so I think if we're going to be this country that supports everyone and loves everyone, we have to be able to stand up and speak, even if we don't know the exact words to say.
So Cam, if you don't mind, I'm gonna pick on you. Going from that, so she talks about standing up for your fellow man, for your fellow individual, and being an ally for racial diversity, LGBT, a variety of very marginalized groups in the country. So for you, what specifics would you like to see from allies? So like I said, Kenise brought up her points, but I'd love to know, is there something different for you? Is it a personal thing of what you want to see from allies?
What I would like to see is I would like people to step outside, because I'll start this off by saying I'm Black, but I'm not African American. And a lot of times, like my whole childhood, I grew up learning about African American history in February, but only February. I hear about Martin Luther King's blood ran through my veins, and I grew up to realize my mom's from England, my dad's from Trinidad. I have no connection to the African culture, and I was put in that box, and I never got to celebrate my Caribbean culture. And now as an adult, I'm starting to learn about that culture. So I would hope that people would see more than just not just group everyone into Black is African American.
Yeah, and I'm gonna call myself out for a minute. And Cam, when we first met, I said I'm happy to have two African Americans here on this panel, and I was completely wrong. Right? Like, you called me out, and I really loved that. I think you need to have that kind of dialogue, those hard discussion questions, or calling somebody out or calling yourself out. I think that goes right back into allyship, right? I assumed you were something based off of the color of your skin. I think that's a fantastic example of what do you want to see from allies. I want them to see deeper into who I am. I don't want you to just stop at that color and assume that that's who I am, if I'm getting that correctly.
Yeah, and I think a part of the allyship is understanding that maybe just like you mistake me as an African American person, I can tell you the truth without feeling like I'm gonna hurt your feelings, or that you're gonna be resentful towards me in any way, because you're actually open-minded and you approach the situation with humility and the desire to learn more. So I do appreciate that.
So moving on to our next question, and I'm going to answer this next question. And it's, when did you begin your journey as an ally? I personally identify as an ally. I want to be an ally for as many marginalized groups as I possibly can, whether it's LGBTQ or Black, Mexicans, Hispanic, Asian, any group that I can possibly find a way to help, I want to help them. But I never, that's something that I adopted. I don't think allyship is something you're born into. You have to learn how to become an ally. Growing up in high school and middle school, and where I came from in Connecticut, it's a very conservative, very small, very tight-knit community. And I was definitely having some very negative internal thoughts about the racial issues going on around our country. And I was very reactionary to it. I was very defensive. And I only started coming around to it when former football player Colin Kaepernick began kneeling during the national anthem. And I remember at first time seeing that, I was like, why would you do that? That is silly. That is ignorant. That is not something that I want someone doing to my country. Like, I took it as a personal offense for no reason. And then seeing how my side of the aisle, if you would, responded to that, responded to Colin Kaepernick would come out and say, this isn't about the flag. It's not about the military. It's about, I just want to feel safe and I want the same freedoms as you have. And that really resonated with me. Seeing that and recognizing, like, why are we viewing this in such a twisted, different light than what they're actually trying to say, right? It doesn't matter about what words they're trying to say. It matters about the meaning. And the meaning behind Colin Kaepernick's words were crucial. And that began my path that I think I'll be going down for my entire life, of trying to come to terms with the world that I live in, improve my allyship, be there for my friends, be there for my community. I'm going to get off my soapbox in a minute, but I want it to be known that it isn't something that just happens. What Kenise and Cam are talking about doesn't just happen. You don't wake up one day and think, you know what, Kenise, how can I help you? That's not a normal, natural thing, unfortunately. We have all of these internal biases and all of these negative thoughts that we have to go through and recognize that we personally have to make a change. So for me, the biggest barrier that I personally encountered, and what I think other people will have to encounter about how we can become allies, is just that defense mechanism, that resistance to change. If someone walks up and tells you, hey, you're wrong, 9 times out of 10, you're going to dig into your beliefs. You're going to say, I'm not wrong. I'm Stephen Cadieux. I do everything perfectly. I am great. But that's not it at the end of the day. There's so much to learn. There's so much that every single person of different colors, genders, races, that we all need to believe and we all can learn from. So Kenise, you've heard my answer, but what's the biggest barrier? Why did it take years for someone like myself to adopt allyship? And why aren't some of my closest friends back in Connecticut, why haven't they adopted this? What is stopping them?
Stephen, it could be several things. I think a lot of people, and I'm going to use the word white. I hope you're comfortable. Everybody's comfortable with that. I think a lot of white people like their privilege. I think a lot of white people like their power. I think a lot, you can be born white, you can marry white, and you can die white. You never have to have a person of color enter your world, and you have to decide if a person of color will enrich your life. It's a real thing. I also think that a lot of times everyone is born with this level of fear. And there's a level of fear that enters when you are being socialized. So when you see images on TV of negativity around color, especially Black color, when you have had those images since birth, then you always have some type of unconscious, deep-seated bias that you've lived with that you have no idea is so far back in your mind that you don't even know it's there. So power, privilege, fear gives people a reason to not even want to step into this space. And if I don't know anyone in this space, or I've had negative interactions with people of color, and it's a lot of times people take one incident and make it their lifelong story. Or if I've never had a friend, or I've never had a colleague, or I've never gotten close or leaned into brown spaces, I'm kind of, and I hate to use this word, but there's an ignorance. There's a lack of understanding about people of color. So Stephen, I can go on and on about the barriers, but I think the largest barrier is fear, and that's what keeps people from learning.
Cam, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I think one of one of the biggest barriers, I believe, is, at least for white people, is if you spoke up and you were an ally for a Black person, speaking up to another white person, you might look lesser in that other white person's eyes. If you kind of understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of white people will, they in their heart, they believe to themselves, but they keep it silent because they don't see it benefiting them in any way to speak up.
So Cam, a follow-up question to that. Is someone who believes in allyship and wants to be an ally, are they not an ally if they don't speak up?
No, because then they're just maintaining the status quo.
And I see it as a bystander, because you're not a bad person if you don't stand up. But a lot of times white people don't take the time to understand why is it important to stand up. Like what will that bring? White people have a power that no other culture has. And when you stand up against something, people tend to listen. And so if they understand what their power is and their privilege is, they'll understand allyship, because they will use their power to bridge gaps, to get people better jobs, to get things happening in their community. And it's kind of like, once you figure out what power you hold, the next best thing is to give it away and to do something with it. So you're not bad. It's not a bad thing, but you then just become a bystander.
And how could someone who's white, who doesn't feel they hold any power, how would you be able to help them realize that they have this power and that it can be used for positive change? If there's a poor white person who does not have a college degree, I'm sure they would say, I have no power. I can't do anything. It's like, why are you expecting things from me that I can't provide?
Yeah. Well, I have to say this. Allyship and even understand, just having this dialogue is a lifelong process. This is not something that comes overnight. And so you have to connect with the person when they're ready for the connection to happen. That poor person may never see the reason to become an ally because they've never gotten to that place in their life where they can bridge that gap and come over to helping and supporting other people outside of themselves. And unfortunately, just like with anything else, you can change the minds and thoughts of some, but you may not be able to change the thoughts of others. It's when that person comes to the notion that they want to change is when you have to rush right in. So Stephen, I can just thinking about you. I don't know what I could have said to you when you were in that mind frame that would have changed your mind until you felt passion. People usually change when they're passionate about something, when they're empathetic, when they are, when they're educated, when they, Cam always uses in our speeches, if the strawberries and the strawberries and the chocolate, yeah, when the strawberries and the chocolates, let's just say two different types of people join forces, and then it becomes a chocolate covered strawberry. When you finally get someone in your family that that changes your mind, a mixed child, you adopt a Black child, only when it matters in your life is when people change. And for Stephen, I'm glad it came to you, but you had to be passionate about it. You had to get angry. You had to have emotion. And that's when things change, when you get some emotion around it.
I also believe another great way to do it is by exposure. I think once people are exposed to different cultures, they realize that they are just human. I've traveled to 30 different countries for boxing, and being on the USA team, when I leave, I go as an ambassador. So I'm expected to kind of learn the cultures and norms and be a good representative of the culture of the United States. And I've learned to kind of find the norms and the do's and don'ts of each country before I go. And that introduced me to other cultures, and I'm completely fascinated by it. And if I don't understand a culture, or if there's something I don't understand about a certain culture, once I'm amongst those people, I realize that there's a reason why they do certain things that they do. Like I'm Trinidadian. If example we used during the talks is, if you were to come to one of my barbecues growing up, which was in New York, but it was a Trinidad barbecue, there'll be loud music, people will be yelling over each other. At the domino table, people are slapping the table and yelling at each other. It looks violent, looks angry, but those people are having the time of their lives. And if you were a white person, you looked around, you realized that everyone who showed up with empty Tupperware. Because in Trinidad culture, they don't give gifts, they give food. Because a part of the culture is the celebration, and the celebration is able to go on. If it's a Saturday night celebration, it goes on until Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, until whenever the food is done, the celebration is technically done. But if you don't show up with a to-go or with an empty Tupperware container, the head of the household, my grandma, would ask why you didn't do so. Because in her eyes, now that you expect her to cook for you and also give you one of her Tupperwares with her good lids, because she's very, very particular about her lids. So it's just different cultures and different customs. And once you're immersed in the culture, you kind of understand why Trinidadians are the way they are. Because in Trinidad, you don't really have neighbors, you have family with different last names. So if you're cooking, everyone in the neighborhood who's there, you cook for everyone's children. And that's kind of how they spread love. But in America, we don't do that as much. So it is kind of odd for others. But being exposed, basically what I'm saying is being exposed to other cultures helps alleviate the ignorance.
So that ties directly into what Kenise and Cam, what you both just said about what my next bullet point, my next discussion question is going to be, which is how can we help create allies in other people? So you've talked about waiting until they're ready and exposing them to different cultures. Do you guys have any other suggestions or ideas about how we can make more people allies, how we can bring them to this style of thinking?
Well, just like today, Stephen, you're raising the consciousness of this dialogue. I mean, just right here, you're educating people. Change brings on, things that are happening in our world. Media, positive media, can change someone's mind. Taking a stand, walking with people. There's so many different forms that you can do. Just being in the company or in brown and black space, going to a jazz concert, a rap concert, just putting yourself out there. And then I think it's more about being fearless. You just have to be fearless. And so I don't ever go in somewhere fearful. I never was taught to be fearful. I never was taught that when I walk into a grocery store, people are going to be looking at me to steal. I didn't grow up that way. Black people don't teach their kids these things. We're not always looking for white people to be mean to us. That's not what we do. Now, some of us have been taught to be more aware, to be aware of our surroundings, that when we are put in a situation, we need to be thoughtful. But I lead fearless. And what I find with many white people, that they are very fearful, and they're fearful of making mistakes. And I say, make the mistakes, ask questions. Don't live in ignorance and in the middle of this. It's like being insecure. Don't live there. Be fearless and just go out and, because I'm looking at your panel here, and I'd like to, at one point, talk to your panel, but, I see some African-American males, and I'd like to hear from them. And I'm going to say Black males, because not everybody is African-American. Um, I see some Black males here who I'd like to hear from them, from the people on their campus. What is it that, what does that look like from an athletic standpoint? Like what, do you come to the school? Did you come to the school? Everybody's allies. Did you have to learn about each other first? Did you, how does that work when you are on a team?
Does anyone have any
Kyle's smiling.
feedback?
Kyle, can you?
Well, sorry, I was like chewing gum, almost choked a little bit. But one of the things that I've always learned to do, and one of the things that my mom always emphasized with me, was don't go looking for problems. And if you meet somebody that is genuine, that does care about you and who you are as a person and your struggles, accept them. So in a sense, I don't always think the worst in people, but I just assume that, they are who they are. And regardless of if they accept the struggles that I go through as a Black man, or they see it, or they are empathetic towards me, I have to accept them regardless. And if we're in a community, even if they're racist, even if they love everybody, they love every race, I still have to accept them for who they are. So I've learned to kind of be objective and to take a lot of my emotion out of how I view other people and how I see other people, and accept those who accept me. And basically, when you do get a friend or a ally, make sure that that person is treated really well, because you never know. They'll need you, you'll need them, and it works both ways.
Great. Kyle, can I ask this? Were you taught about white people as a child? Did your mom warn you or tell you anything about white people?
It's funny. It's actually funny that you say that, because no, I was not taught. I'm from the Bahamas, and I grew up in the Bahamas until I was about 13, and I was in a baseball academy from when I was 10, and I wanted to play baseball in America, so that was like a big thing for me. So I started looking at schools, and two of the schools that I looked at to go to were both in Georgia. And so I'm talking not Atlanta, Georgia, country Georgia. So when I got there, we're driving, you see horses, you see cows, you see like very small towns, nobody that looks familiar to me. And I had the biggest culture shock ever. My school was very international, but getting into the town and seeing the day students at the school, because there were boarding and day students, there were a lot of country kids from the area, like, and I would say country because they had their culture is very country. So they had cowboy boots, cowboy hats. I mean, they just come from everywhere. Some of them were from Atlanta. Some of them were just from all different types of the country. I mean, all over the country. And it I wasn't taught to, and I didn't necessarily understand when somebody may have been malicious towards me, because I didn't really know why, because I was so young, and my mom didn't necessarily, think that I was going to run into these issues, because the school itself was so diverse. And that's one of the things that she tried to make sure of before she sent me off. But long story short, I learned through experience is what I want to say. So I learned through, maybe somebody giving me a dirty look, maybe somebody kind of treating me not so well, and me not genuinely understanding why, because I'm thinking, oh, like I didn't necessarily understand the scope of what America kind of goes through. I mean, what America is and what Black people go through. So it helped me to put myself in an African American shoes, because I was judged off of my skin color. Even though I'm from a different country, I didn't necessarily understand everything in its entirety. But I learned through experience, and I learned through dealing with different types of people and working with different types of Black people to kind of see how everything works, and like how to operate in a society that is predominantly white and is predominantly Black, because I also graduated from a HBCU. So I've gotten a little bit of both worlds, and I just kind of have navigated through both accordingly.
Awesome. And Stephen, I really wanted you to hear Kyle say that, because that is majority of the Black experience. I think that's a myth to some. I don't know if white people know this, but I think sometimes when I talk to white people, they think that all Black people are angry, and we all grew up, you know, thinking that white people are out to get us. And I don't know if that's true for you too, or you guys are not, but we don't grow up that way. And the United States is the only country who looks at people racially. Like we judge people by race. Many other countries, it's money, social class, kings, queens, you know, it's about money and family name and things like that. But here in America, it's about race.
Yeah, and Kyle is one of my best friends in the program together, hang out and talk often. I mean, the conversations that I've had with Kyle and my friends Charles and Jason from in the program specifically are huge. They're crucial to my development as not only an ally, but as a human being. Hearing other sides of things, like what Kyle had to go through and what he was raised and how he came to the mindset that he currently has, which is a very positive, very encouraging, optimistic mindset, is something that I never thought people go through. Like you said earlier, Kenise, you said, well, we're not taught that people think we steal. And that's a stereotype that a lot of white people have, where we just assume you know about stereotypes, or that we assume these stereotypes are true. And you can't grow as a person without hearing another side of things, without hearing another perspective, such as Kyle's. So right off the bat, Kyle, thank you for sharing.
No problem.
So does anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share before we move on?
Yeah, I think a step that people can take is accepting sitting in discomfort. Because a lot of times you have these conversations and it's going to be uncomfortable. If it's going to do anything, it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. If you want growth, you're going to have to sit in the discomfort, and taking constructive criticism. Just as you assumed I was African American, and I just said I wasn't, and you understood that, and you didn't take any offense to it. And sometimes being told that we're wrong, especially if you've always been seen as like, let's say as a white male who's always been looked to for answers in the room, if you're being told you're wrong, you have to kind of sit with that sometimes. And I think accepting that you're going to have to be uncomfortable is, I think, a great step.
And I think branching off of what you just said, the whole concept of being comfortable while being uncomfortable, from our standpoint, we work with athletes, we work in athletics. And tied into that concept, a lot of coaches have the mentality of no pain, no gain. Or when I was a rower, our motto was you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. But we only like to think of that in the physical sense, right? Like it's easy to just sit under a bench press, add 10 more pounds on either side, and have a bunch of people yell at you, and you fight through that pain. It's momentary. It's a lot more short-lived, and you can sometimes see direct benefits from that. But that concept of being mentally or personally uncomfortable, working in the mental field, like I think that is wildly important. And we like to stop at that physical barrier, or we like to use sports psychology just for mental gain, for performance. But we need to have people be uncomfortable. We need to have those uncomfortable conversations, and we need you to deal with it, right? Be uncomfortable. Like Cam, when I said you were African American and you called me out, rightfully so, I was so uncomfortable. I almost started tearing up. I was like, wow, I got it wrong. Like he's not gonna like me. Like he's not gonna want to present. Like am I a bad person? Like that just wave came over me, and I had to like fight it back for a second, swallow my emotions and my ego, and realize that no, like this is important. Like this is what I need to go through. Like if I want to learn, I need to be uncomfortable, and I need to have those awkward feelings of I was wrong.
But Stephen, when you're the power dominant culture and you've been told that everything that you do is right, to be wrong is devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think in this race conversation, white people are finding out that they've been wrong with some things. They've been wrong with some thoughts. They've been wrong with the history. They've been wrong with the notion of stereotypes. I mean, lots of things are coming up that are wrong. And there's this thing called cognitive dissonance. It's between what you know and what you've learned, and it's not making sense. I know that smoking is bad, but I'm going to smoke anyway. It's like, what in the world? Like, I'm hearing that all these things that I'm learning now about race and religion and privilege, I hear it, but what I was taught, something different. And now I'm in this really uncomfortable space, this dissonance that I can either choose to believe it or I can choose not to believe it. And so I think a lot of times now today, it's like, I'm afraid to make a mistake. Make the mistake. It's like going to another country, trying to order food, and you get it all wrong, but they love you anyway. And so, and then, you know, why can't we make those mistakes here in America? What's wrong with that?
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think, like you said, the cognitive dissonance, that concept of having to be, oh, I'm right all the time. What do you mean I'm wrong? That sudden change in the fabric of your power, of your privilege, of your personal structure, it can be really damaging, and most people just would refuse to turn the blind eye to it. So just to keep the conversation moving, because I want to get to the Roger Goodell video, one question, and I know this isn't exactly how it's worded on the slide, but we kind of covered it, but can you build allyship in someone of a different race than your own? So for instance, could Kyle, a Black man, help me achieve the initial steps of allyship, or does that have to come from someone of the same skin color or the same cultural background as me?
I would go even further to say that with building allyship, there are going to be a lot of ears that will only listen to a white voice. So we do need more white voices who are educated and well-versed with culture to speak, because I love the fact that you're leading this, because there may be white people who wouldn't listen to Kanisa Ryan, but they will definitely listen to you. So yeah, I believe more voices and more colors.
There's power in white voice. There's power in white people talking to white people. There's a woman by the name of Robin DiAngelo out of Seattle, and she talks a whole lot about white privilege, and you know how white people can move through this conversation and be okay. The level of where this conversation goes is deep. And a lot of times, white people don't want to talk deeply about things. They want to stay on the surface because surface is safe, right? And so there's power in white people talking to white people, but there's also power in asking a Black person the real story. Like, come on, tell me the real deal. You know, can I ask you questions that are burning inside? Can Kyle and you have a conversation about music or about food or about, yes, you can, but get deeper into how are you raised? How did you grow up? What else, you know, tell me more. And what you'll find is that a lot of what you have what you will talk about will be in common. Like, you're going to find that auntie who's about the same in every family, an uncle who's the same, a grandparent who has the same values. You will see a lot more commonalities when you just ask the question.
I agree. And I think that's a beautiful statement. I think that's that's where it comes down to. That's how we can grow as people. So Kenise introduced me to an amazing podcast series that I recommend for everyone called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. And this is from a former football player. And he was able to sit down and talk with the commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell. And I wanted to just play a 1-minute clip and talk very briefly about that clip before we get to any final questions and comments. So if you bear with me while I load this up. It's 2:55. And I hope everyone can hear this. And if you cannot, please let me know immediately.
So Stephen, there's a little box that you have to check. So you stop sharing for a minute
Yep.
And then when you go to share it again, on the bottom, you'll see a box that says like optimize.
The computer sound.
That's the one. Yeah. Now you'll be good.
Got it. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
All right, let's try that one again.
My family, and I don't want anybody else to live in that kind of fear.
So many of these players come from these communities. Predominantly, I think the NFL is roughly 70 or so percent black. But then the ownership, I think it's roughly 90, 95% white. How can you mend the disconnect between ownership, which is predominantly white, that might not inherently understand, and your workforce and players that are predominantly black who may have grown up or lived this out? How can you mend that rift?
By exactly what you're doing. Make them have uncomfortable conversations with their players.
Yeah.
Make them go and sit and listen. Don't listen to me at a league meeting. Go and talk to your players. Have that conversation. Work with them. Go with them on a ride-along. Many of our owners have, by the way. They've gone on ride-alongs. They've gone to bail hearings. I had an owner with me from the Saints, Gail Benson, who sat right there. And that it's the same thing. It'll move you to really truly understand what's happening in your communities that you may not be seeing every day.
Mm-hmm.
We may be privileged or in a different part of town, but it is happening nonetheless. And it's important to stop it and to change it.
So that's a very brief clip of a 20-minute video series, 2 parts on YouTube. I recommend everyone check
3 months
it out.
ago, you came out.
How do I go to the next slide? Here we go. Pardon. So I recommend everyone check out that video, check out the entire podcast series. I watched a few. They're all very short, very concise. It's all very well put together and it raises some amazing issues and some fantastic points. So Cam and Kenise, if you'd like to just briefly tell me what are your thoughts overall of the video and how does that clip that I just shared you tie into the overall theme of allyship, which we're talking about today?
Yeah.
So I watched the entire series, pretty much every episode. I believe there's 7 or 8. At first, my big gripe with it was I wasn't uncomfortable. That was the first thing I said. None of the questions are uncomfortable questions. There are a lot of uncomfortable questions to be asked, but I don't think he's hitting on them. But also I had a slight change of heart because I realized that it's not uncomfortable for me because I'm at a different level. But this might be an uncomfortable conversation to people who are in the elementary stages of their growth. If you do watch the entire Goodell video, there are parts that he didn't really apologize. He didn't really address the Kaepernick situation. But the fact that a former NFL player who was probably the greatest paycheck he ever received was from the man sitting across from him. I think it's so funny how the power dynamic had switched between the two. I don't want to be too hard on the gentleman doing the series because I love the fact that he's just promoting the conversation. And I believe what we need to do is have more people ask, even if it's not the most uncomfortable questions, but just start a dialogue. And the greatest thing I think he's doing is starting that dialogue.
And Stephen, for me, just in the little clip that you just saw, I'm bothered a little bit about, go have a conversation and then it switched to a police ride along. Like go to a ride along. Like what? Like I just don't understand. It went from get to know somebody to negativity. Go into the streets and see what the police are doing. I get that. I mean, I get it. And I get that we want to get the full gist of what's happening in our community. But that's not the message that I think white people see enough of negativity and the ride-along approach. What they need to do is go to an HBCU like where Kyle went, or go to where people are doing good things. Go meet the person, the Black president or the Black CEOs, or go meet people who are doing great things so that you can change your biases and that you can change your stereotypes. Because everyone's getting their images and their information from television. And that is a true myth. Black people are so talented in so many ways that it's endless. The possibilities of where we are reaching are endless. And we don't know those people, but he's encouraging you all to go on a ride along. Like, I just, to me, that.
Is that the only place you can find Black people?
Right. So we have our own biases to these videos, but we like to watch these videos because they are a step in the right direction, but really it's still a video. And think about why these videos are being made. We need to really be thinking about what media is doing to us and why we get the information we get. And don't let one source of information be your only source. So.
And I agree completely. I don't think that that's the most positive clip, but for me, that was probably one of the more impactful moments of that, because it has that dichotomous shift of, let's go experience Black culture in a cop car, right? It's this really drastic change, and it's a very interesting way to view it, which I believe is a very negative way to view it. However, I personally don't think Roger Goodell is as versed with his allyship as he's leading on. And so for me,
he's not woke.
No,
and
no, definitely not.
He needs to be, because he has Black players. I mean, how many? 70% of the NFL is Black. So you need to be the most woke person because it starts at the top. And it starts with leadership, because how will you tell your coaches what to do if you're not doing it? Don't come to me, go to your coach. But the coach is only going to get the signal from the top. So I'm glad he's having the conversation. I'm glad he finally is speaking out about it. But yes, there's a lot more that he probably needs to do to understand what his allyship is.
I agree, and I think that goes well. There's a couple quotes here that I got from other parts of the interview. They're very impactful, but the thing that I want to focus on the most is on that bottom quote. And Kenise, I think this ties in very well with what the overall concept of what we talked about. I don't think Roger Goodell, like you said, is a woke gentleman. I think that leadership is influence. I've said that a million times. I'm going to continue saying that 1,000 more. Right? It's how we influence people, and he is that influential individual. And after the conversation, Emmanuel Acho, I forgot his name, he's the interviewer, said that the fact that Commissioner Goodell was willing to sit down was the biggest takeaway, right? Like, we can sit here and say, Roger Goodell, bad person. I wholeheartedly believe he's not a top 10 commissioner, but that's just for personal reasons. However, at least he was willing to sit down. The quote that I gave.
But Stephen, for what cost? So dig, and for you, I'm going to make you dig a little bit deeper.
Let's do it.
Why would Goodell need to get on today? Why didn't he get on a couple of years
ago?
because
it's to save his face and the face of the NFL. It's for purely personal reasons. It's not for the betterment of the Black community.
And money drives everything. Money is such, I mean, that the NFL alone is a conglomerate. You know, they bring in lots and lots of money. If Goodell didn't make a stance or talk somewhere or have an interview, everyone's been waiting for him to say something. And so, you know, although we know that, you know, his sponsors, not that they would pull out, but they're waiting on him to say something, because basketball made a huge step in one direction, but he did not. So I just want everybody to just continue to dig deeper. Why did he come on? It was great, but why? What would be his why? Because did he tell us that in there? Did he say why he was coming out?
He said that I had wanted to do this for a while. I had wanted to come out and denounce racism. And I know I messed up on the Colin Kaepernick issue, but I swear I'm a good guy. That was the essential of the entire conversation.
So he had to prove to you that he wasn't a bad guy, that he didn't have any race issues. And he brought in, and people need to listen to the rest of it. But he brought in his father, but didn't bring in himself. I mean, so, trying to weed through media, you got to sift through the conversation as well. And without having this dialogue, Stephen, and having people of color on the line, you may not ever hear the other side of it, or you may not be able to be challenged in that way because you don't hear that. And we hear a lot by just, some words. You don't even have to come out and say certain things. And we're like, there's something behind that. But it's good dialogue when you have multiple cultures sitting at the table. That's why that's a value.
I agree completely. And I would love to continue talking on that. And I don't want to disrespect you by cutting you off. Unfortunately, we are running.
Done.
Okay, perfect. We are running out of time. So I want to open up the floor very briefly for about 5 minutes. If anyone in the chat or anyone listening has any questions, comments, concerns, or compliments, I take all 4 to myself, Kenise, or Cam. Now would be that time to either turn on your mic or text it into the chat.
I do have a question. Well, I have a statement and a question. So one of the things that I struggled with a lot this year was kind of realizing that, not that I'm powerless as a Black man, but I don't necessarily have as much influence or power to get what I need to get done, in my opinion, to be successful. And one of the things I've realized was the power isn't really on my side, it's on the majority side. And so one of the things that I've really struggled with is, in a sense, allyship, because I've tried to make sure that I have been, I've acted a certain way to people to where I do gain some allies that are of a different race. So what, for you guys, I just need your assistance, but what would you guys recommend I do to kind of set myself up, and what different strategies have you used to build allies with the past?
Okay. Kyle, that's a loaded question, because it's going to take a lifetime for you to get to own who you are. And the more confident you get in who you are, and to get that negative language that you're powerless. No, you are powerful, and you are more powerful than you think you are. And you have a lot more tools in your tool belt than you think you know. But I think for us is to get out into white space to show them how intelligent, how smart, how engaging, how, you just have to own the room, own your space, and own that dialogue in your head, because only you will be able to go as far as your mind will let you. And so I don't allow anyone, if I don't get something, depending on what religious, background you are, I give it to my religious person, oh, maybe God didn't want me to have that today. It's not because the other person or another power group didn't want me to have it. God didn't want me to have that. Or I will say, I didn't get into this door because another bigger door is going to open. I don't allow that negative talk or that negative behavior to come into my space. And so, Kyle, I say to you, keep learning, get into spaces, keep moving, make those moves, meet powerful people. Put powerful people in your pocket and in all different cultures, white, Black, Hispanic, and get to know the people around you and use them as resources. So it's kind of like the networking. Get a Black network, get a white network, get a Hispanic network, and work it. But I don't ever want to hear Kyle. If I meet Kyle again, I don't want to hear you say anything about being powerless, because you are powerful. Charles.
It's cool. Just going off of that, I guess not a question, I guess it's just a statement if anybody feels like they have something to say to it. With that being said, I feel like a lot of Black people, at least that come from where I come from, when you're trying to do that, right, you're taught to have a white voice. You're taught to put a mask on, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So hearing you say own who you are and work a room, stuff like that, personally me, I had to deal with like not putting on a white voice, not putting on a mask in front of people. Like, so now, you know, I may come off as this angry black man to people, but it's cool. Like I'm willing to take that. But like my undergrad, I was acting a certain type of way in front of white people, certain type of way in front of Hispanic people, certain type of way in front of my black friends. Now I'm just who I am, you know? So I think that, this is for another discussion, obviously, but like learning how to actually not put a mask on, because I feel like black people have a lot of identity problems and a lot of issues with actually going into a room for the white people, owning the room when we're taught that we're less than, just through subliminal messaging and media and stuff like that. So like I just wanted to piggyback off of that's something that a lot of black men go through. Like how, like when I go on this interview, I got to dress better than everybody. I have to sit upright. I have to, you know, speak this way. I can't use slang. I can't say I can't do, like, you know. So I do agree with you that we need to learn how to like own the room, but I do think that with that we need to learn how to master who we truly are and not get focused on appeasing the other people, because we have to appease ourselves. We have to be happy with who we are, love ourselves. So I just want to piggyback off that.
Charles, I totally believe in what you're saying, but it took you a little while to get there. And so you had to grow up a little bit. You had to understand who you were and who you are. And I think in the United States of America, we have to have a reality check of this is how we are socialized to believe that we are not good. And I think it starts with Black people as a whole to stop telling us, you know, and living in these spaces, that we have to keep telling our babies and our young people they're beautiful, they're talented, they're smart. And I think a lot of times we don't do that to our own people, you know, our own. And so we are so used to trying to look like certain people and act like certain people. But I want Cam, and don't get me wrong, I had to grow into myself too. So, and I think everybody grows into themselves, but as a Black person, you're right, we are chameleons. And that's what I love most about us though, because I can go into one space and rock one space and be okay in another space, but I gotta know who I am. And that's what you are finding out, is who you are. And that's why I have Cam as my partner, because I got all the education. I checked off all the boxes. I went to school. I did all that, right? But Cam is he's just raw. Like he's raw. He's the equal, the opposite. He doesn't have all the degrees. He doesn't have all this other stuff. And so when we're having these conversations, he's just raw. He just tells it like it is. And so I think you also have to have those kind of people in your space as well, that you always keep the raw, very real. And that's what's made him so successful, because he's not a chameleon. But I don't know, Cam, did you learn to be in that space?
Oh yeah. Okay. I 100% know what Charles is talking about having your white voice, having the way you act around certain friends. For a very long time, every time I would win a championship or something, I would have parties, but I would have different parties for different groups of friends, because I was always worried that if my Trini family was hanging out with me and I was around my white friends, what song are we gonna play? These were like, are we playing Calypso? Are we playing Hoobastank? Like those were always the two, like those two worlds that I didn't want to mesh. And it did take me a long time to be comfortable with who I am. And Kyle said something which I thought was awesome. He says, no matter like how people treat him, he's just going to treat people with respect, and he's not going to have a chip on his shoulder and be angry, because it's very hard to. I think it's hard for someone not to be an ally if they come at you with their misinformation and you handle it professionally and you take the higher ground. So I do like that Kyle takes that approach.
We just have a long way to go, and it's just a long way to go. And Charles, I just encourage you to just be yourself. You just got to be yourself and continue, and Kyle, to be yourself. But it is a journey. And if anybody if you want to be successful as a Black person, you'll have to know yourself better than anybody else knows you.
Oh, and Charles, when I first got into the speaking world, I was talking to these older established speakers to find out how I can best approach the world. And the first thing they told me to do was to cut my dreads, to be more, forgot the way they said it, more professional for a corporate audience, which really meant my dreads might make white people feel uncomfortable and not hire me to speak at speaking engagements because of my hair. And at that point, that's when I realized I had to understand who I am. So I decided not to cut my hair, and I decided to be who I am. It's a part of my culture. And I'd say do the same, man.
Did Jazzy have something to say?
Did, yes. So following up with that, do y'all or would y'all have any advice of how to find ourselves or be ourselves younger? Because as Charles said, so it was a little bit later in his life. For me, it was moving to Miami to be a grad student at BarryU, and I saw this colorful world and a whole bunch of different brown and Black people. And I had an identity crisis because I was like, oh shoot, there's so many different types of Black people, or African American or brown people. It's like, oh, I don't have to fit into this certain box, but now I don't know who I am. So it did take counseling for me to be comfortable in my skin and be who I am and be able to actually thrive. So are there any steps, techniques, skills that we can start spreading like when we are younger compared to, hey, we're adults now and sometimes it's almost too late for a person of color to still be, whether it's acting out or just because they're going through an identity crisis, it's looked at a certain way. And yeah.
Well, let me flip it back on you, Jazzy. What did you need to hear as a young person?
I feel like I just needed to hear, it's okay to be who you are. It's okay that you like different types of music, that you watch different types of shows. Like, it's okay that you literally don't fit into a box because you don't need to and you don't have to.
So who did you need to hear that from? Because I think, and let me answer this, Jazzy, I think it needs to come from the people who socialize you to believe that the opposite. It needs to come from your teachers. It needs to come from pastors. It needs to come from anybody who feeds you information. And that's everybody in your culture and your surrounding. It can't just come from your mom, because your mom's going to always say, I love you, you're beautiful, that you're kind, you can be whoever you want to be. And if you didn't hear that, you need to hear it from your family first. But past that, yes, Kathy, TV, but I really think it's the people who touch you, and it's your teachers. And that's why Cam and I are going into schools right now to teach teachers, because it's a disconnect with your teachers. It's a disconnect with your pastors. It's a disconnect, unless you're in a completely Black world who is always feeding you these things and making you feel that way. But if you're not, like most of us, we hear our images and we hear our conversations from white people. And that's the misunderstanding, because we're not hearing that we're okay to be who we are from people who don't look like us. Because if Kimberly said, you know what, Jazzy, you're beautiful, I'd hire you, you're gorgeous, I'd come on my team, you'd be like, okay, it just gives you that extra boost. But it comes from other people telling you that don't look like you, that you matter. And that's the problem that we have today. It can't just be Black people.
Thank you.
So unfortunately, we are out of time. I know we've already gone past a little bit. So if anyone has any questions, comments, or thoughts, Kenise, Cam, while we were talking, I put your emails in the chat. If you guys would prefer people use a different email, I'd love if you guys could just type that in the chat. If not, I encourage everyone with Kenise and Cam's permission to email them, say thank you because they're fantastic and they're amazing, and ask any more follow-up questions. But from there, I'd like to just personally thank Kenise and Cam for working so hard with me to get this going over the past couple weeks. We worked really well together, and I'm really happy to have gotten to know both of you guys. And so I just want to say thank you very much. And this presentation would not have been the same without you. So thank you.
And I want to go ahead and, Stephen, thank you for putting this together. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you, Kenise and Cam, for taking the time to speak with us. And thank you to all of you students for being here. I know it's a Friday afternoon, and the list of things you could be doing right now are probably extensive. So I just appreciate you all as students to take the time and to be part of these conversations. And thank you all. And sorry, Kenise, I cut you off, so I'll give it back to you.
No. All I was gonna say is that my daughter is a Barry Buccaneer, right? And so I've been on your campus many times. I love Barry. It's a beautiful campus. And Cam and I are always willing to come back on and talk to you guys. But thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
It's going to pop in last thing though, but what you just said, Kenise, to Jazzy is the most powerful thing that I heard that I can do to be an ally. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the talk. Enjoy your Halloween weekend. Stay inside. Stay safe.
Be safe. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday.
Wear your
Yes.
mask. Wear a mask.